And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Flat Acting from iLevel Entertainment is a game about making a movie. Well, kind of. It's actually an area control game with some interesting hijinks thrown in, but it also adds a level of roleplay. Not roleplay, but maybe storytelling would be a good word for it. I think this is an excellent game for families. It's a game in which it has some elements of trying to control different areas of the board, but it also has some fun, interactive stories that you can tell with one another. There might be a few jams as the game gets by, but there's some variants that actually make it very interesting. It's short, it's sweet, it's not too heavy. It's a very well-designed game. Let's look at it. At the beginning of the game, players take turns putting together the board. It's made of 4 different boards that you can put together. You don't even have to put it together nice and neat in a square like I did. As long as these red areas are touching each other, they're doors. I found that a square works the best, however, but again, you can do what you want. Then each player is given a genre. You can have horror, romance, detective, and western. And then there's also cards for the cast, which, if you really wanted to, you can give that to a 5th player anyway. But then players will take turns simply drawing cards from a deck of cards. When they draw a card, let's say, for example, they draw this card here. This shows 2 different characters from the detective genre, and each of these characters is the same value. The player can pick either one of these with the card. They can either put one of those characters on the board in one of the areas that the character is, or they can take a character who may already be on the board and move them to an adjacent area through one of the red doors. Now, when you put a character on the board, or when you put them in, there's 2 things that you need to consider. One is the number of the area. See, for example, this is a number 11. So this lady can fit in there. So could her friend, the detective, and so could something that was worth a value of 1, but nothing else. So there's a limit to what can fit in each room, which actually makes these 5 characters hard to fit around because there are quite a few rooms which don't have numbers that are at least 5 or higher. The other stipulation, when you put one of these people on the board or when you move them, is that you have to give some logical reason. Let's say this gentleman was here in this room, and I moved him over here, and I'm the person who played the card, and I would say the detective moved into the room, moved out into the field to interview the lady. And I can make up any kind of wild story I want it, but as I have to make up some kind of story. Otherwise, another player might call me out on it, and I have to take one of these tokens, which is thumb down's negative points. Now, honestly, in the games that I've played, I've yet to see any of those tokens given out because everyone remembers to give the story. It's just something you do. On your turn, you move, you give the story. I think that's more there to make sure that people do it. And so each card, like I said, shows. For example, this one shows a doctor and an artist. And again, if you can put one on the board, or if one's already on the board, move it through to another room. The tokens aren't all necessarily, they're interesting in the way that they're set up. Here from the horror genre, we see the zombie coming out, and then the sewer. The zombie is actually a token that's long ways, and the sewer is just this flat token that you lay on the ground. And both of those are really, I don't know, I think it adds to the theme. They didn't have to do something like that, but it looks a lot better. And so as the board gets populated with different people, you'll see that the game progresses, and eventually the game will end. And I'll explain how the game ends in just a moment. But during the course of the game, sometimes you'll draw these cards. These cards will give you special abilities. This one here lets you lock an area down. No one can move in or out. Others let you switch characters on the board. Others let you take one character and put them anywhere else. They're basically special cards. I wish that they had the text on them that explain what they did rather than some symbol, but I suppose it's one of those things so you can sell it internationally. When the game ends, and the game ends when a player draws one of these cards, and they can neither add or move one of these characters legally. That means both of the characters are on the board, or there's no room for you to add one, and neither one of them can be moved. When that happens, and it can happen fairly quickly, the game immediately ends. Each area is then checked, and the person who has the highest point value in that area scores points equal to the numbers of that area. So, in this room, even though I have a grating and this monster is coming up in the kitchen, who knows why, even though he's a value of 2, the horror genre is going to score 7 points, regardless of who put it there, because you'll be putting out cards of other people's genres, characters all over the board. But one of the interesting things is, if you have 2 characters that, let's see here, let's pretend all 3 of these people are frolicking in the garden. Here I have a horror character worth value 4, and I have someone from the romance genre rank 4. So the skeleton and the artist, I don't know, maybe she's sketching the skeleton. They both are 4, that's the highest number. They are both eliminated, and the second highest wins, which would be the gambler there with his 3. Now, of course, they couldn't fit there because they're 11, but let's say that situations like this happen quite frequently. So if you see that someone's winning a genre, you can move someone else in to tie them and then put in one of your own to get second place, which means you win. Again, the areas fill up pretty quickly. There's only so much room to move people. So much of the game comes in the form of the storytelling itself. I enjoy the artwork of the game. I like the genres that they pick. There's silly genres that lend themselves to B-movie plots. And, why is the zombie chasing the preacher and the detective down the road? You can think of some funny story, and kids have a blast with it. Adults have a blast with it. The actual gameplay itself, like I said, most of the areas have small numbers, so they get filled up pretty quickly. Moving around gets tight pretty quickly, so it's not as fascinating as a game as you might think, except that the theme adds a good layer to it. There are some variants in the rules. I think there's, how many different variants are there here? There's quite a few, maybe like 10 that you can add. The one that I would recommend that you play with most definitely would be a hidden genre, where you don't know who's what genre, because that makes the game to be much more interesting. When you see someone put someone somewhere, are they trying to win that spot, or are they just putting that person out of the way? It makes, to me, for a much more entertaining game. 5 players crowds the board a little bit. You can play that way. It seems to be best with 3. That way you have 4 genres. One of them's hidden. One of them's a neutral genre that no one knows about. Then there's the crew, who's also neutral and that no one is sure who controls it. But it seems to be a very strategic, short game. We're talking, I don't know, not roast beef here, but some just decent fried chicken. This kind of game becomes. It's not the heavy game, a deep strategy, but it's a lot of fun. Check it out. This one might slide under your radar, and I'm telling you to look at it and give it a try.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.